Commander Alex Reed thought this was just another diplomatic mission. Then the ancient armor chose him. Now he's fighting shadow creatures with a suit that feeds on his life force, bonded to a princess who might be his only hope of survival. The Federation starship Horizon settled into Zephyrian orbit with a low hum through its decks. Commander Reed stepped onto the soil of a world that had never seen a human boot print. He carried a security proposal in his data slate and a sidearm he hoped not to use. The air smelled of ozone and something floral he couldn't name. His combat boots sank into the violet moss that carpeted the landing area. He knew diplomats didn't wear tactical gear to condolence calls. The weight of the weapon on his hip felt both familiar and wrong. His uniform was Federation standard, but the boots were his own choice. Broke 3 regulations and might save his life. Princess Varia waited at the base of the ramp. Her eyes held intelligence that went beyond formal greetings. She measured him in one glance, noted the boots, the weapon, the way his eyes tracked the perimeter guards. Her greeting was cool, precise, and carried the weight of hidden calculations. The violet sky above them seemed to pulse with a light that wasn't quite natural. Beneath the surface beauty lay a civilization that held its breath. Reed could feel it in the too still silence of the greeting party, in the way the Zephyrian guards' hands hovered near weapons that glowed with soft internal light. Golden Age technology hummed everywhere. The landing platform floated without visible supports. Energy fields shimmered at the edges of structures that seemed grown rather than built. The apparent subservience of their welcome felt like a thin veil over something much sharper. Reed's military background made every instinct warn this wasn't normal. His last 6 missions had been trade negotiations and cultural exchanges. This felt like walking into an unmarked minefield where every step could detonate centuries of resentment. The political landscape here wasn't just complex, it was lethal. Every gesture from the tilt of his head to the placement of his hands carried consequences he couldn't yet calculate. The Zephyrians watched him with expressions that gave nothing away. He followed Varia through corridors that seemed to breathe. The walls pulsed with soft light that responded to their movement. She spoke of trade agreements and cultural exchanges, but her eyes said something else entirely. She was testing him, measuring reactions he didn't know he was giving. This high-stakes game of interplanetary trust had rules he hadn't been taught. The Federation needed Zephyria's technology, but the Zephyrians needed something more. Reed could feel the imbalance in every interaction, the unspoken tensions that vibrated just below polite conversation. He didn't know it yet, but the armor's awakening would rewrite everything. His mission parameters, his identity, his very understanding of diplomacy, all would shatter in the chamber ahead. The combat boots were just the first clue that this assignment was never about negotiation. The ground beneath his feet felt increasingly alien with each step toward the palace. The air grew heavier, charged with energy that made the hair on his arms stand up. Varia's pace slowed as they approached a massive archway that seemed carved from living crystal. Reed's hand drifted toward his sidearm without conscious thought. The princess noted the movement with a slight smile that didn't reach her eyes. She knew exactly what kind of man the Federation had sent them. The chamber held the air of a tomb that remembered being a throne room. The armor of Kalor stood on a crystal pedestal, untouched for 3 centuries according to Zephyrian records. Dust motes drifted in the pale light that fell from overhead, settling on metal that showed no oxidation, no wear, only a patient stillness. Reed expected to observe it from a respectful distance, to nod at appropriate moments while Varia recited ceremonial history. Instead, she turned to him with an expression that erased all diplomatic protocol. "Try it on," she said. Her voice held no ceremony, only a sharp curiosity that felt more dangerous than any weapon. Reed hesitated. This broke every rule of first contact protocol, every guideline about handling alien artifacts. He started to form a refusal, but her eyes held his, challenging, measuring. The armor moved before he could speak. Plates disassembled themselves with a series of soft clicks that echoed in the silent chamber. Metal segments floated free of the pedestal, rotating slowly in the air like leaves caught in an unseen current. They hung there for a heartbeat, then flowed toward him with deliberate purpose. Liquid mercury finding its shape. That was the closest comparison his mind could form as the pieces moved. They swirled around his body in a dance of precise geometry, never touching him yet mapping his form with invisible sensors. Varia took a sharp step back, her controlled composure cracking for the first time. Her hand went to her mouth. eyes wide with something beyond surprise. True shock, the kind that comes from seeing impossible things. The first plate touched his chest with a cold that made him gasp. Then another at his back, his shoulders, his legs. The cold became a deep warmth that spread through his body like good whiskey. Neural interfaces activated without warning, without request. Pinpricks of light danced behind his eyes as systems he didn't understand booted up in his nervous system. He became a passenger in his own skin. His arms lifted without his command, rotating so the forearm plates could lock into place. The helmet descended last, sealing with a hiss that sounded like a final door closing. Inside, displays flickered to life, showing biometric data in script he somehow understood, though he'd never learned the language. Varia's voice came through the helmet's external pickups, hushed and shaken. This should not be possible. She was speaking to herself, to the empty room, to centuries of tradition that had just shattered. The armor chooses only royalty, only our bloodline. The prophecy she hadn't mentioned yet hung between them in that moment, an outsider awakening their ultimate weapon. The words took shape in his mind as if the armor itself whispered them. He felt the weight of expectation settle on him alongside the physical weight of the suit. This wasn't ceremonial. This was functional, lethal, and now his. The helmet's interior display showed power levels rising, systems coming online that hadn't been active in generations, weapon interfaces, tactical overlays, energy modulation controls, all in a language that felt both alien and suddenly familiar. The armor had made its choice, and Reed understood with cold certainty that choices like this couldn't be unmade. Varia approached slowly, her hand outstretched but not quite touching the armor's surface. The prophecy said it would happen during our greatest crisis. Her eyes met his through the helmet's visor. I didn't believe it until this moment. The terror in her voice wasn't for him, but for what his activation meant for her world. The crisis had arrived, and their greatest relic had chosen a stranger to face it. The helmet sealed with a final metallic click that echoed inside his skull. Then the flood began. Information poured into Reed's mind like water through a shattered dam. He tried to process it, to organize the torrent into something recognizable, but his human brain couldn't sort the data streams. Star charts unfolded behind his eyes, three-dimensional maps of systems the Federation hadn't yet charted. Weapon schematics followed, energy projection matrices, plasma containment fields, tactical assessments of Zephyrian war technology that should have taken years to comprehend. The knowledge didn't arrive as data files. It arrived as understanding, complete and immediate, burning itself into his neural pathways. Battle strategies from wars fought centuries ago played out in his mind. He saw fleet movements around dead stars, ground campaigns in alien jungles, siege tactics against floating cities. Each strategy came with casualty reports, logistical requirements, and after-action analyses. The weight of thousands of combat decisions settled on him, each with its own consequences and lessons. Zephyrian language clicked into place in his understanding. Not just vocabulary and grammar, but cultural context, idioms, historical references. He understood 7 different dialects simultaneously, along with the social implications of using each. Customs followed, greeting rituals, dining etiquette, mourning practices, mating ceremonies. A complete cultural download delivered in seconds. The armor didn't just show him these things, it made him feel them. Physical sensations blended with the data streams in disorienting waves. The ache of old wounds from warriors long dead. The fatigue of night marches across frozen wastelands. The adrenaline surge of boarding actions against rebel ships. His body registered sensations that weren't his own. Memories that belonged to the armor's previous wearers. He saw through their eyes in rapid succession. A general watching his lines break at the Battle of Crimson Sands. A queen defending her throne room against traitors. A young prince on his first patrol along the mineral deserts. Each perspective lasted only moments, but carried the full emotional weight of the original experience. Triumph, despair, determination, fear, all washed through him without filter. The armor wasn't just protective gear. It was a teaching tool, and the lessons were brutal. It showed him Zephyria's military history not as dates and events, but as lived experience. He felt the heat of plasma burns, the impact of projectile weapons, the cold vacuum of space breaches. Each lesson carried the stark reality of combat without the luxury of theoretical distance. Reed realized with dawning horror what had happened. He wasn't just wearing advanced technology. He had become the carrier of Zapiria's entire military history. Every strategy, every weapon system, every tactical innovation from 3 centuries of warfare now resided in his mind. The armor had chosen its vessel, and in doing so, had made him responsible for everything it contained. He could feel the knowledge settling into his consciousness, finding unused pathways and neural connections. The process felt like watching shelves fill in a vast library he hadn't known existed. Each piece of information locked into place with finality. There would be no forgetting, no returning to not knowing. The weight of it pressed down on him, more physical than the armor itself. He understood now why only royalty had ever worn this suit. It wasn't about bloodline purity. It was about the burden of command, the responsibility of holding an entire civilization's defensive knowledge. The armor had judged him capable of bearing that weight, and the realization was more terrifying than any battlefield he'd ever faced. The first alarm screamed through the palace corridors just as Reed's head cleared enough to form a complete thought. He was still reeling from the flood of alien knowledge when the emergency lighting snapped on, casting everything in pulsing crimson. The sound wasn't like any alert siren he'd heard, higher-pitched, more urgent, with a vibration that set his teeth on edge. Shadows detached themselves from the walls. They flowed out of solid stone like ink spreading through water, taking shape as they moved. Reed's training screamed at him to identify weapons, tactical advantages, defensive positions. But these things carried no weapons. They were the weapons. They moved like darkness given purpose. Their form shifted constantly, never holding one shape for more than a second. Sometimes they looked almost humanoid, sometimes like swirling clouds of black smoke, sometimes like hunting animals he couldn't name. They made no sound beyond a faint hiss like steam escaping under pressure. Federation security teams poured into the corridor, their plasma rifles humming to life. Bright blue energy beams sliced through the air, passing clean through the shadow forms without effect. The creatures seemed to absorb the energy, growing slightly larger, slightly more solid with each shot. The soldiers adjusted tactics, switching to projectile weapons. Bullets tore through where the shadows had been moments before, hitting only walls and occasionally their own men. The creatures didn't attack with claws or weapons. They flowed over the security teams like black tide. Where they touched living flesh, the soldiers stiffened, then collapsed. Their armor remained intact, their weapons still charged, but the people inside were gone. Empty husks settled to the floor with a dry rattle of armor plating. No blood, no visible wounds, just complete life drainage. Their attack patterns made no tactical sense. They didn't take cover, didn't prioritize targets, didn't establish fire lanes. They moved through solid objects as easily as air, appearing behind defensive positions, rising from floors, dropping from ceilings. Reed watched them bypass armed guards to touch unarmed technicians. They weren't hunting combatants. They were harvesting biological energy. Berea stood beside him, her expression clinically detached. Ground deployment, she noted, her voice calm amid the chaos. They usually attack energy sources first. This is new. She watched another security team fall without a single shadow creature taking damage. Her assessment held no panic, only professional interest. She'd seen this before, or something like it. Reed understood in that moment why the Federation needed Zapirian technology. Their ships, their weapons, their entire military doctrine, none of it worked against this threat. Plasma rifles and personal shields were useless against creatures that phase-shifted through matter and fed on life energy. This was why they'd sent a diplomat wearing combat boots to a civilization that hadn't seen war in centuries. The shadows moved with terrible efficiency. They didn't pause to feed, didn't seem to take pleasure in the killing. Each touch was precise, economical, draining a victim completely before moving to the next. They worked like harvesters in a field, methodically collecting a crop. This wasn't invasion. This was resource extraction on a biological level. Reed felt the armor respond to the threat. Systems he didn't understand activated automatically. Energy readings flickered across his visor display, showing the creature's shifting density patterns. The suit's tactical analysis suggested attack vectors that made no conventional sense. Strike during phase transitions, target energy convergence points, use resonance frequencies. The armor knew how to fight these things. It had done so before. The shadows ignored him completely, flowing around the armored form as if he weren't there. They concentrated on the Federation security teams, draining them methodically. Reed realized they saw the armor as part of the environment, not as a living thing worth harvesting. The suit masked his life signature, made him invisible to their senses. He stood untouched in the middle of the slaughter, watching men die because their technology was obsolete against this enemy. The Horizon's security team established a textbook defensive perimeter. They moved with the smooth coordination of professionals, plasma rifles humming, personal shields flickering to life around each soldier. They covered every angle, every approach, their formation perfect for any conventional threat. The shadows ignored their perfect formation completely. Plasma beams sliced through the air, brilliant blue lines of contained energy that should have vaporized any known material. They passed through the shadow forms like light through smoke. The creatures absorbed the energy, their darkness deepening slightly with each hit. The soldiers switched to kinetic weapons, their rifles barking sharp reports that echoed in the stone corridors. Bullets tore through where the shadows had been moments before, punching holes in walls and equipment. Personal shields failed completely. The energy barriers designed to stop projectiles and energy beams offered no resistance to the shadow touch. They flickered and died as the creatures passed through them, the technology overloading in silent spasms. The soldiers behind those shields had seconds to register the failure before the darkness reached them. Their bodies collapsed where they stood, armor still intact, weapons still charged, but the life gone from them. Tactical scanners couldn't lock onto the shifting forms. Targeting systems cycled through recognition protocols, trying to categorize creatures that changed density and composition faster than the computers could process. The shadows flowed from solid to ethereal and back again, their energy signatures shifting across spectrums no Federation sensor could track. Every time the security team adapted their tactics, the shadows adjusted within moments, evolving past each new defense. Reed watched trained soldiers become casualties in heartbeats. These were professionals who had handled border disputes, pirate suppression, riot control. They knew how to handle themselves in combat. None of that mattered here. Their experience counted for nothing against an enemy that defied physics itself. He saw Lieutenant Vargas go down, then Corporal Chen, then Sergeant Kozlov. Good soldiers, competent people emptied in seconds. Varia stood beside him, her voice calm amid the carnage. Federation technology was never designed for this threat, she observed. She watched another security team fall without flinching. Your weapons assume physical laws that don't apply to them. Your shields protect against energy they don't use. Her assessment held no judgment, only factual observation. She'd seen this before, understood the fundamental mismatch. The armor on Reed's body hummed with a low vibration that resonated through his bones. Systems he hadn't activated came online automatically, responding to the threat with silent purpose. His visor display showed energy patterns the Federation scanners couldn't detect, highlighting weak points in the shadow forms. The suit recognized these creatures, understood their nature on a level beyond technology. He realized then what Varia already knew. Superia's ancient ways weren't primitive. They were specialized. Their technology had evolved to face threats the Federation had never imagined. The armor on his body held knowledge that couldn't be downloaded into a computer system, understanding that lived in the metal itself. It knew how to fight these things because it had been created for exactly this purpose. The shadows continued their methodical harvest, ignoring Reed completely. They flowed around his armored form as if he were just another part of the architecture. The suit masked his life signature, made him invisible to their senses. He stood untouched while better soldiers died around him, their advanced technology worse than useless against this enemy. He looked at Varia, at the calm certainty in her eyes. She had known this would happen. She had watched Federation arrogance meet a problem it couldn't shoot its way through. The ancient armor on his body felt suddenly less like a burden and more like the only thing standing between these creatures and complete victory. They found a moment of quiet in a storage chamber shielded by triple reinforced doors. The sounds of combat faded to distant thumps and energy discharges. Reed's breathing came hard inside the helmet, the recycled air tasting of ozone and his own exhaustion. Varia leaned against a stack of crates, her composure showing its first cracks. She watched him with an expression that mixed wonder and dread. "The armor should have killed you by now," she said. Her voice held no malice, only clinical observation. "It drains life energy with every activation. You should be on the floor like your soldiers." She gestured toward the sealed doors where shadows still hunted. "There is a reason for this. Reed felt the truth of her words in his bones. A deep weariness had settled into him during the fighting, different from normal fatigue. It felt like something vital was being drawn out through his pores. The armor hummed against his skin, warm with stolen energy. Varia reached into a hidden pocket of her robes. Her fingers emerged holding a crystal tablet no larger than her palm. It glowed with soft internal light as she activated it. Ancient Zephyrian script floated above its surface, rotating slowly. "Our oldest prophecy," she said, "written 3 centuries ago when the armor was forged." The words described an outsider awakening their ultimate weapon. Not a Zephyrian, not royalty, but someone from beyond their world. The text specified the armor would choose someone not of their bloodline, breaking millennia of tradition. The chosen one would arrive during their greatest crisis, when shadows threatened to consume everything. Reed listened as she translated the ancient phrases. Each line seemed to tighten around him like another layer of the armor itself. The prophecy spoke of the armor seeing what others could not, recognizing potential where tradition saw only rules. It mentioned a convergence of need and capability that transcended bloodlines. Every previous wearer came from royal families, Varia explained. Her fingers traced the floating letters without touching them. For 30 generations, the armor passed from parent to child. The bonding rituals, the training protocols, all designed for our physiology, our genetics. She looked at him, at the alien metal encasing a human body. "You break every rule we ever established." Her modern skepticism warred with the evidence before her. She had been trained in Zephyrian science, taught to value observable data over ancient texts. Yet here stood proof that defied all her education. The armor had chosen against every logical parameter. It saw something in this human that met a need no Zephyrian could fulfill. Reed felt the weight of decision settle on him. He could fight this destiny, try to remove the armor, return to being just a diplomat. Or he could embrace what the suit offered, the power to fight these creatures, the knowledge to understand them. The armor had given him no choice in bonding, but it demanded one now about commitment. Varia watched him weighing options. "The prophecy suggests the armor makes no mistakes," she said. Her voice softened slightly. "It chooses based on needs we cannot always see. My people need this weapon active. Your people need protection from these shadows. The armor seems to think you can provide both." Outside the chamber, something heavy struck the reinforced doors. The metal groaned in protest. Reed felt the armor respond to the threat, systems cycling up automatically. The decision was being made for him by circumstances, by need, by the simple fact that he was already wearing the one thing that could fight back. He looked at Varia, at the crystal tablet still glowing in her hand. Ancient words written centuries ago had just described his arrival on this world, his bonding with this suit. The coincidence felt too precise, too tailored. The armor on his body hummed with agreement, as if acknowledging its own role in a plan much larger than either of them. The weakness hit Reed as the last shadow dissipated. It wasn't normal fatigue, not the honest exhaustion of muscles pushed too hard. This felt deeper, more fundamental, like something essential had been siphoned out through his pores. He leaned against the cold stone wall, his breathing ragged inside the helmet. The armor felt heavier now, its warmth suddenly oppressive against his skin. Every energy burst from the suit had cost him. He could feel the depletion like a bank balance draining too fast. The more powerful the attack, the greater the drain. That final burst that shattered 3 shadows at once had left him lightheaded, his vision swimming at the edges. The armor fed on his life force with ruthless efficiency, converting his vitality into weaponized energy. Varia watched him with knowing eyes. "The previous wearers were consumed by it," she said. Her voice held no drama, only fact. "They grew weaker with each battle. The armor doesn't make mistakes in its choice, but it offers no protection from itself." She gestured at his trembling hands. "It takes what it needs without regard for the cost." The suit responded to his emotional state in dangerous ways. When fear spiked during combat, the armor drew more power, reacting to his adrenaline surges with increased energy consumption. Anger made it burn brighter, hotter, draining him faster. Even focus came with a price. The more he concentrated on targeting, the more the suit pulled from his reserves. Control was a constant battle against his own reactions. Reed faced death from an unexpected direction. Not from the shadow creatures still hunting through the palace, but from the very thing protecting him from them. The armor would consume him long before the invaders could. Each moment wearing it shortened his life, each defense costing pieces of his future. The suit gave power but demanded payment in the only currency that mattered. He had to learn to wield it without being destroyed. The knowledge flooded into him from the armor's memory banks. Previous wearers had developed techniques, breathing patterns that minimized energy loss, mental disciplines that regulated emotional response, combat styles that maximized efficiency. They had learned to fight with surgical precision rather than brute force, to make every energy expenditure count. The armor's systems showed him his own vital signs on the internal display: heart rate elevated, blood oxygen dropping, cellular energy levels in the warning zone. It monitored his decline with cold accuracy, reporting the cost of survival in numbers and graphs. The suit knew exactly how much life it was taking, and seemed indifferent to the eventual outcome. Varia placed a hand on his armored forearm. "You need to understand the balance," she said. "Too little power and the shadows kill you. Too much and the armor does." Her touch felt distant through the suit's sensors, like someone knocking on a thick door. The great wearers lasted decades. The reckless ones died in weeks. Reed looked at his reflection in a polished metal surface across the corridor. The armored figure stared back, alien and imposing. He had thought he was wearing a suit. Now he understood he was wearing a predator that happened to be hunting his enemies. The armor would protect him from external threats while slowly eating him from the inside. His survival depended on feeding it just enough to keep fighting without letting it consume him completely. The knowledge from previous wearers offered no comfort. They had all faced the same equation, this same balancing act between immediate death and slow consumption. Their accumulated experience showed in the suit's recommended tactics: conservative approaches, minimal energy deployments, strategic withdrawals. The armor itself advised caution even as it hungered for more power. The weakness in Reed's limbs had become a constant presence, a deep ache that went beyond muscle fatigue. Each breath came harder than the last inside the helmet. Varia watched him with clinical detachment that couldn't quite hide her concern. She saw the tremor in his hands, the way he leaned too heavily against the wall. The armor was consuming him faster than she'd expected. "There is another way," she said. Her voice cut through the hum of the suit's systems. "An ancient solution. Our ancestors developed it when Guardians served for life, not just for single campaigns." She approached him slowly, her movements deliberate. "The ritual requires skin contact. Energy exchange. It is the highest honor our people can offer." Reed's mind raced through the implications. Skin contact meant removing part of the armor, exposing himself in a hostile environment. Energy exchange sounded like something from fringe science reports he'd read during xenobiology training. The professional boundaries he'd maintained since landing on Zapiria seemed suddenly fragile. The practice dated back to when Guardians bonded for life with their royal partners. Varia explained it matter-of-factly, her tone that of a physician discussing treatment options. The royal bloodline carried unique properties that could sustain the armor's wearer. Her ancestors had developed this symbiosis out of necessity, creating bonds that transcended mere physical need. The connection went deeper than energy transfer. It created a spiritual union that previous wearers described as more intimate than marriage, more binding than blood relation. Guardians became extensions of the royal will, their senses enhanced, their understanding deepened. The ritual wasn't just about survival. It was about becoming something more than human or Zapirian. Reed hesitated. Crossing species boundaries felt like violating every protocol he'd ever learned. The Federation had strict guidelines about interspecies contact, about maintaining professional distance during diplomatic missions. This went beyond all those rules into territory no manual covered. He thought about the consequences, about reports that would never be filed, about explanations he could never give. Varia's expression hardened. "The alternative is your certain death," she stated flatly. "The armor will consume you within hours at this rate. You've seen what happens to those it drains completely." Her gesture took in the empty corridors where shadow creatures still hunted. "Your professional concerns won't matter when you're another empty shell." Their survival depended on embracing a tradition that felt alien in every sense. Reed considered the practicalities. The ritual required specific conditions: a shielded chamber, precise positioning, mental preparation on both sides. Varia knew the steps, the words, the physical requirements. She had been trained in this since childhood, though she never expected to use it with an outsider. The armor seemed to respond to the discussion. Its systems hummed with what felt like anticipation. Reed felt a pull toward the idea, a curiosity that wasn't entirely his own. The suit remembered this ritual, remembered the connections forged through centuries of practice. It knew this could work. Varia placed her hand against his chest plate. The armor warmed at her touch. "This is not intimacy as your people understand it," she said. "It is necessity. It is survival. My energy can sustain you where yours fails." Her eyes held his through the visor. "The armor chose you. Now you must choose to accept what it requires." Outside their temporary sanctuary, something heavy slammed against the reinforced doors. The metal groaned in protest. Reed felt the armor's energy levels dipping again, felt the familiar drain starting. The decision made itself in that moment. Protocol didn't matter when facing extinction. Tradition didn't matter when breathing became a struggle. He nodded once, the movement slight inside the helmet. "Show me," he said. The words came out rough, strained. Varia's expression shifted from professional assessment to something closer to resolve. She began explaining the preparations, the steps they would need to take. The ancient ritual offered the only chance either of them had to survive what was coming. Varia led him downward through passages that grew older with each turning. The modern palace architecture gave way to stonework that felt ancient, the air growing cooler, heavier. They moved through spaces that hadn't seen regular use in generations, their footsteps echoing off walls carved with symbols Reed's newly acquired knowledge identified as pre-dynastic. The descent felt like moving backward through time. The hidden temple sanctuary revealed itself gradually. First came the change in air pressure, then a subtle hum that vibrated in the bones rather than the ears. The final door wasn't door at all, but an energy field that parted at Varia's touch, shimmering like heat haze before dissolving. Beyond lay a chamber that defied simple description. The heart of Zapiria rested at the center of the space, contained within a crystal platform that might have been a throne in another context. It pulsed with light that seemed to come from within the crystal itself, rhythms that suggested both machine and living thing. The light moved in patterns that felt mathematical yet organic, precise yet unpredictable. Reed's armor reacted before his eyes registered the full scene. Systems he hadn't known existed came online with a series of soft chimes inside his helmet. Energy readings spiked across his display, showing power levels that shouldn't be possible. The suit hummed with new purpose, its earlier fatigue replaced by something like anticipation. The armor recognized this place, this energy source. Varia watched the armor's response with clinical interest. "My people sought this for generations," she said. Her voice held reverence but also frustration. "My father spent 40 years searching archives, following clues, excavating sites. He believed it held the key to understanding our entire civilization." She gestured toward the pulsing light. "He never truly found what he was looking for. The heart powered their entire civilization, yet remained fundamentally mysterious. Zapirian science could harness its energy, but not explain its nature. They could channel its power but not comprehend its source. The crystal platform contained a mystery that had driven generations of researchers to obsession and madness." Reed felt the truth of her words in the way the armor responded. Systems that had been draining his life force now drew energy from the ambient field around the heart. His fatigue eased slightly, the constant drain lessening in the presence of this ancient power source. The suit seemed to remember this place, this connection. Varia admitted what her people rarely spoke aloud. "We've never controlled it," she said. Her hands remained at her sides, making no move to touch the crystal. "We've learned to draw power from it, to build civilizations on its energy. But we don't understand how it works or why it exists." Her honesty felt like a confession she'd been holding for years. This legendary energy source represented their only hope against the shadows. The armor's reaction proved that much. The suit knew how to interface with this power in ways Federation technology never could. Reed understood suddenly why the shadows had come now, why they attacked with such precision. They weren't just harvesting life energy, they were after the source itself. The heart pulsed with light that seemed to look back at him. Patterns shifted within the crystal, forming shapes that almost made sense before dissolving into new configurations. The armor systems continued their low hum, communicating with the ancient power source in a language older than Zapirian civilization. Reed felt like a witness to a conversation that had been ongoing for millennia. Varia finally moved closer to the crystal platform. My father believed it was a fragment of creation itself, she said. A piece of whatever energy birthed the universe. Her hand hovered just above the crystal surface. If that's true, then the shadows aren't just invading. They're attempting to corrupt something fundamental. The armor's display showed energy patterns that matched nothing in its extensive database. The heart operated on principles beyond Zephyrian or Federation understanding, yet the suit knew how to work with it, how to draw from it, how to become something more in its presence. Reed felt the potential in the air, the possibility that this ancient mystery might offer salvation where all modern technology had failed. They stood together before the pulsing light, human and Zephyrian, armored and vulnerable, looking at the heart of a civilization neither fully understood. The shadows continued their hunt elsewhere in the palace, but here, in this ancient sanctuary, there was only the hum of impossible energy and the weight of decisions yet to be made. Reed approached the crystal platform containing the heart of Zephyria. The light that had seemed beautiful moments before now felt wrong in ways he couldn't quantify. The pulse had changed, developing a hesitation, a stutter in its rhythm that hadn't been there before. He felt it as a physical discomfort in his chest, a queasiness that had nothing to do with fear. Dark tendrils swirled within the previously clear light. They moved like ink dispersing in water, twisting through the brilliant energy patterns. The darkness pulsed with a rhythm of its own, counterpoint to the heart's natural beat. Where light and shadow met, the energy crackled with visible tension, tiny arcs of conflicting power that spat and hissed. The corruption matched the energy signature he'd seen in his helmet display during the shadow attacks. The same frequency, the same dissonant vibration that made his teeth ache. This wasn't just similar, it was identical. The shadows hadn't come from outside. They'd grown from within, born from this poisoned source. Varia's breath caught as she saw the truth. The invasion began here, she said. Her voice held the flat tone of someone realizing they'd been looking at the problem backward. They didn't need to conquer us. They needed to corrupt our power source first. Her hands clenched at her sides as she understood the implications. The shadows weren't attacking the palace, they were protecting their point of origin. The Shadow Lord's strategy became clear in that moment. This wasn't military conquest. This was sabotage of the most fundamental kind. Poison the well, then wait for the enemy to weaken. The Federation's arrival had simply accelerated the timetable, forcing the shadows to reveal themselves sooner than planned. Using the heart's power now would be catastrophic. Any energy drawn from it would carry the corruption, spreading the darkness further through Zephyrian systems. The armor's connection to their technology, to their power grid, all of it would become pathways for infection. The very thing that could save them might doom them instead. Reed's armor reacted violently to the contaminated energy. Warning glyphs flashed across his visor in rapid succession. Systems that had hummed with anticipation now shrieked with conflict. The suit tried to draw power from the heart while simultaneously rejecting its corrupted nature. The resulting feedback made his muscles spasm, the armor struggling against itself. They had to purify the heart before they could use it. The solution wouldn't come from technology alone. Zephyrian science had already failed to understand the heart's true nature, let alone cleanse it. Federation technology was useless against energy this alien. Whatever answer existed would have to come from somewhere else, from methods older than either civilization. The armor's knowledge offered fragments of possibility. Ancient texts spoke of purification rituals, of connections that could overcome corruption. The suit remembered stories of guardians who had faced similar threats, who had used bonds rather than weapons to heal damaged energy sources. The answers were there, buried in memory files older than the Federation itself. The solution would demand connection of a kind Reed hadn't considered. Not just between himself and Varia, but between their species, their understandings, their very natures. The armor had chosen him for reasons beyond military capability. It needed someone who could bridge gaps, who could form bonds across impossible divides. The dark tendrils continued their slow dance within the heart. Each rotation spread the corruption further, the sickly purple light gaining ground against the pure blue. Time was running out. The Shadow Lord's work progressed even as they watched, the infection deepening with each pulse of energy. They would have to act soon, with or without complete understanding. Reed looked at Varia, at the determination hardening her features. She knew what they faced. She understood the stakes. The solution would require both of them to venture into territory neither had explored, to trust in connections neither fully understood. The armor hummed with agreement against his skin, its systems still conflicted but slowly aligning toward a single purpose. The throne room confrontation never involved physical weapons. The Shadow Lord manifested as shifting darkness that coalesced near the corrupted heart, his voice emerging from the swirling blackness without clear source. The sound vibrated through Reed's armor, bypassing external speakers to resonate directly in his mind. It felt like thoughts that weren't his own, ideas planted in soil they didn't belong in. "Join me," the voice suggested. The words carried images with them. Reed commanding vast fleets, receiving the submission of countless worlds, standing above civilizations as their unquestioned ruler. The armor could channel the heart's full power, the voice explained. Not just defend, not just protect, but dominate. The suit could make him a god rather than a guardian. The offer appealed to human ambition with precise understanding. It showed Reed significance beyond anything the Federation could offer, power that would make diplomatic missions irrelevant. Why negotiate when you could command? Why protect when you could control? The Shadow Lord understood the human desire for impact, for legacy, for being remembered. It offered all this without effort, without struggle. Reed responded with the pragmatic skepticism of someone who'd filed too many requisition forms. He viewed the offer like a promotion package, impressive title, increased responsibility, but questionable benefits. Absolute power sounded appealing until you considered the administrative overhead. Ruling 1,000 worlds meant dealing with 1,000 worlds' problems. The armor hummed in agreement against his skin, sharing his assessment. He contrasted the empty promises with practical considerations. Godhood didn't include better dental coverage. Dominion over civilizations came with logistical nightmares he'd seen firsthand in smaller scales. The Federation had taught him that power meant paperwork, responsibility meant bureaucracy. The Shadow Lord offered glory but skipped the details of daily governance. The offer revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of human nature. The voice assumed ambition would override connection, that the desire for significance would outweigh existing bonds. It didn't understand that Reed's military background had taught him the value of teamwork over individual glory. It missed that his diplomatic training emphasized building bridges rather than thrones. His refusal stemmed from the relationships he'd already formed. Varia's intelligence, her people's resilience, even the frustrating bureaucracy of his own federation, these were things worth protecting, not ruling. The armor had chosen him because he understood protection required cooperation, not domination. The suit remembered previous wearers who had learned this lesson through hard experience. The Shadow Lord's approach felt like a terrible employment offer from a questionable employer. Reed considered the working conditions, the management style, the long-term prospects. The voice promised power but showed no understanding of what made that power meaningful. It offered control without purpose, dominion without community. The armor provided silent confirmation of his assessment. Its systems showed energy patterns that revealed the truth behind the offer. The Shadow Lord's power came from corruption, from draining others rather than building together. The suit's memory banks contained records of similar temptations throughout history, all ending the same way: isolation and eventual destruction. Reed's decision felt less like refusing power and more like choosing a better path. The bonds he'd formed with Varia, the connection to her people, the responsibility he felt toward both civilizations, these were stronger incentives than empty godhood. The armor had chosen someone who valued partnership over domination, and that choice now proved right. The voice faded as Reed's resolve solidified. The shifting darkness seemed to recoil from his certainty, from the clarity of his refusal. The offer had been a test, and he had passed by choosing connection over control. The armor hummed with approval, its systems aligning more completely with his will. They would find another way to face this threat, one that didn't require becoming what they fought against. The temptation dissolved like smoke in wind. Reed stood firm in the throne room, the corrupted heart still pulsing before him. But now he understood the true nature of the conflict. This wasn't about power, it was about preservation. The armor had chosen a guardian, and a guardian's duty was protection, not domination. The choice felt right in his bones, confirmed by the steady hum of the suit against his skin. Varia watched the corrupted heart pulse with its sick rhythm. Her expression shifted from observation to decision, Conventional methods cannot cleanse this, she stated. Her voice held no doubt, only the certainty of someone facing a truth they'd avoided. Our technology created barriers. Their technology cannot penetrate. We need something older. She turned to Reed, her eyes measuring the armor that encased him. The ritual we performed created a resonance between us. That connection might channel pure energy where force has failed. She spoke without poetry, without romanticism. This was tactical assessment, a strategic evaluation of available resources. Their emotional bond became a potential weapon against cosmic darkness. Love and loyalty transformed from personal feelings into operational assets. Varya explained it with clinical precision. The armor responded to emotional intensity, enhanced all sensations, including Reed's feelings for her. This wasn't accidental design, it was intentional. Engineering by Zephyrian ancestors who understood connections beyond physical reality. She proposed focusing on their bond while Reed linked with the heart. The resonance they shared could counter the Shadow Lord's corruption through harmonic opposition. Where darkness created dissonance, their connection could restore balance. The theory sounded impossible, but the evidence stood before them. The armor itself proved Zephyrian understanding exceeded Federation science. Reed had to open himself completely. Not just physically, not just mentally, but emotionally. The armor required total vulnerability to function at maximum efficiency. Previous wearers had learned this through harsh experience. The suit drew power from emotional honesty, from connections forged in truth rather than convenience. The armor responded to their discussion even before they acted. Systems activated that Reed hadn't known existed. Glowing blue nodes appeared on his chest and arms, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. Varya identified them as transfer points designed for exactly this purpose. The suit anticipated what they planned, remembered this procedure from centuries past. They gambled on connection where force had failed. The Federation's technological approach had proven useless. Zephyrian defensive systems had been bypassed. Only something more fundamental than technology might work against corruption this deep. Their bond represented the one thing the Shadow Lord couldn't understand or counter: genuine connection. Varya placed her hand near the nodes without touching. The armor enhances all sensations, she reminded him, including what you feel for me. The statement carried no sentiment, only factual preparation. She knew the intensity would be magnified, the experience amplified beyond normal limits. This was part of the design, part of what made the ritual effective. Reed felt the truth of her words as the armor hummed with increased energy. The suit recognized their intention, aligned itself with their purpose. Systems that had struggled against the corruption now oriented toward the new approach. The gamble felt less like chance and more like following a path the armor had walked before. The transfer points glowed brighter as they focused on their connection. Energy began to flow between them even before physical contact. Reed felt the armor drawing from their emotional resonance, converting feelings into usable power. The system worked exactly as Varya's ancestors had designed, transforming human connection into tangible force. They stood before the corrupted heart, two people from different worlds, betting everything on a bond that shouldn't exist between their species. The armor hummed with approval, its systems fully engaged with their plan. Where technology had failed, where weapons had proven useless, connection might succeed. The ancient design proved wiser than modern understanding. Reed placed his hands on the crystal platform. The surface felt neither hot nor cold, but alive with vibrating energy. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the heart's light surged toward his palms, flowing into the armor like water finding a new channel. Pure energy flooded through him, so intense it should have vaporized flesh and bone. The armor drank it in, channeling the power with ancient precision. The suit began to change. What had been dark metal now glowed with internal light. Plates reconfigured themselves, shifting from protective covering to luminous embodiment. The transformation wasn't just visual. Reed felt it in his nerves, his muscles, his very cells. Human and Zephyrian energies merged within him, creating something that had never existed before. He wasn't just wearing technology anymore. He was becoming something new. He became a conduit rather than a weapon. The energy flowing through him felt clean, purposeful, directed. Where the armor had once focused on combat systems, it now channeled purifying light. The transformation represented unity between their species, human resilience combined with Zephyrian technology, Federation adaptability merged with ancient wisdom. He was the living proof that their civilizations could work together. Varia's energy sustained him throughout the process. He felt her presence like a steady current supporting the torrent flowing through him. Their connection provided stability where the raw power would have overwhelmed him. She wasn't just an observer. She was part of the transformation, her royal bloodline properties interacting with the heart's energy in ways neither could fully understand. The armor integrated a fragment of the heart into his chest plate. The crystal shard settled against his sternum with a finality that felt both terrifying and right. It pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat, a permanent connection to the power source he now served. The fragment glowed with the same light as the main heart, but purified, cleansed of the Shadow Lord's corruption. He was no longer wearing the armor. The distinction had blurred, then vanished completely. The systems that had once felt like separate technology now registered as his own senses. Neural interfaces that had been uncomfortable intrusions now felt like natural extensions of his nervous system. He could feel energy flows as clearly as he felt air moving in his lungs. The guardian form stood complete. Light emanated from within rather than reflecting from without. The suit had transformed from protective gear into a living embodiment of purified energy. Reed moved his hand, watching light trail from his fingers like liquid illumination. The motion felt effortless, natural, as if he'd always possessed this form. Varia watched with wonder that overcame her usual reserve. She saw the prophecy fulfilled in physical form. The armor had chosen its guardian, and the guardian had become the armor. Her people's greatest relic had found its purpose in an outsider, and in doing so, had created something beyond their ancient expectations. The transformation settled into a steady state. The light pulsed gently rather than blazing uncontrollably. Reed felt the power contained within him, ready for direction rather than bursting for release. He understood now what the armor had been designed to become, not just a weapon, but a focal point, a living conduit between civilization and the energy that sustained it. He looked at Varia, and she nodded slowly. The time for preparation had ended. The guardian stood ready, transformed not just in appearance but in fundamental nature. The armor had chosen its vessel, and the vessel had accepted the transformation. What happened next would determine the fate of two civilizations. Reed focused the purified energy toward the dimensional breaches. The power came not from his will alone, but from the connection with Varia, from the heart's cleansed light, from the armor's ancient understanding. He felt the energy build within him, a pressure that demanded release. The shadows reacted immediately, swirling into concentrated darkness that resisted the approaching light. The creatures didn't attack. They coalesced around the rifts, forming barriers of pure negation. Their darkness absorbed light, sound, even thought. Reed felt his energy meeting resistance that should have been impossible. The shadows had learned, adapted, prepared for this exact confrontation. They understood the threat he represented now that he carried the heart's purified power. His light didn't destroy them. It transformed their energy instead. Where the light touched shadow, the darkness unraveled, not into nothingness but into neutral energy that dissipated harmlessly. The effect was silent, efficient, almost surgical in its precision. Each shadow that dissolved weakened the overall resistance, creating openings for more light to penetrate. The dimensional rifts began closing as the light reached them. The edges knitted together like healing wounds, the sound a low hum that vibrated through reality itself. It wasn't the explosive destruction of conventional weapons, but something quieter, more fundamental. Space-time mended where it had been torn, the universe restoring its natural order. Each sealed breach weakened the Shadow Lord's influence. Reed felt the diminishment like a pressure lifting from his mind. The connection between the rifts and their master became apparent as they closed. Each one served as an anchor point for the corruption. With fewer anchors, the Shadow Lord's hold on their reality weakened proportionally. The armor guided his movements with precision he shouldn't possess. Ancient battle strategies surfaced in his awareness. Tactics developed for wars against enemies that twisted reality itself. He moved without conscious thought, positioning himself for optimal energy projection, anticipating shadow movements before they occurred. The suit remembered how to fight this war, and he became its instrument. Varia channeled energy through their bond, sustaining him against the drain. He felt her presence like a steady current beneath the torrent of power flowing through him. Her royal bloodline properties interacted with the purified energy, enhancing its effectiveness against the shadows. Their connection proved stronger than the Shadow Lord's corruption, a fact that became more evident with each closed rift. The battle ended not with explosion, but with quiet resolution. The final rift sealed with a sound like a deep breath being released. The remaining shadows dissolved into harmless energy, their connection to their master severed. The silence that followed felt heavier than the combat, filled only with the fading hum of the armor's systems and their own breathing. Reed stood amidst the aftermath, the light within him dimming to a steady glow. The dimensional breaches were gone, healed as if they'd never existed. The Shadow Lord's presence had vanished completely, his influence cut off at the source. The victory felt complete yet oddly peaceful, achieved through transformation rather than destruction. The armor's systems registered the changed reality. Energy levels stabilized, threat assessments cleared, tactical displays showed only the normal background readings of Zepyrian technology. The transformation had worked exactly as designed, proving the ancient methods superior to modern warfare. Connection had succeeded where force had failed. Varia approached slowly, her expression showing the same quiet satisfaction he felt. They had done what neither civilization could accomplish alone. The Guardian had fulfilled its purpose, the armor had justified its choice, and the prophecy had proven its worth. The shadows were gone, the rifts were sealed, and their reality was whole again. The immediate threat gone, political realities returned with familiar weight. Reed stood in the aftermath, the armor's light dimmed to a steady glow, and watched diplomats replace soldiers in the palace corridors. Federation officials moved with renewed purpose, their expressions shifting from combat readiness to negotiation posture. The crisis had changed everything between Zepyria and the Federation, rewriting rules that had stood for decades. Reed's new status disrupted existing power structures. He was no longer just a diplomat, not quite a soldier, something entirely new. The armor remained part of him, its presence a constant reminder that he served two civilizations now. Zepyrian guards treated him with reverence that felt uncomfortable. Federation personnel regarded him with uncertainty, unsure how to categorize a man who wore alien technology like a second skin. Zepyria gained exclusive trading rights with Earth. The negotiations happened quickly, without the usual protracted bargaining. Federation representatives agreed to terms they would have rejected weeks earlier. The Shadow Lord's invasion had demonstrated Zepyrian technology's value in terms beyond economics. Their energy systems, their defensive capabilities, their understanding of dimensional physics, all became assets the Federation needed desperately. The Federation received a permanent human ambassador to Zepyria. The appointment required no discussion. Reed found himself holding the position by default, the only candidate who could bridge both cultures. His dual status as Guardian and Federation officer created a unique diplomatic role that had never existed before. He would answer to both governments while serving something larger than either. The Guardian would serve as protector rather than military asset. This distinction became crucial during treaty discussions. Zepyrians insisted the armor remain independent, answering to their ancient traditions rather than Federation command structures. The Federation agreed reluctantly, recognizing that conventional military oversight couldn't apply to something they didn't understand. The suit's abilities remained available to both civilizations, but controlled by neither. Varia's position strengthened with Reed's support. Her people looked to her with new respect after the crisis. She had championed the outsider when others doubted, had trusted ancient prophecy over modern skepticism. Her alliance with the Guardian gave her political influence that extended beyond her royal title. She became the bridge between Zepyrian tradition and their new future. Both civilizations adjusted to their changed relationship. Federation diplomats learned to consult Zepyrian elders on matters beyond trade. Zepyrian technologists shared previously guarded secrets about energy management. The shift from potential domination to partnership required recalibration on both sides. Old suspicions faded slowly, replaced by practical cooperation born from shared survival. The armor's choice validated Zepyrian prophecy over Federation skepticism. Military analysts who had dismissed ancient texts now studied them with serious attention. Cultural specialists reevaluated everything they thought they knew about Zepyrian civilization. The suit's selection of an outsider became a case study in intercultural understanding. Proof that some truths transcended technological advancement. A new era began, built on mutual respect rather than domination. The treaty signing ceremony reflected this change. Instead of the Federation's standard diplomatic chamber, they used the ancient temple where the heart pulsed with cleansed energy. Instead of elaborate speeches, there were simple exchanges of commitment. Both sides recognized that their survival depended on this partnership, that the shadows could return without warning. The political aftermath settled into a delicate balance. Reed stood between two civilizations, his armor humming softly with contained power. He watched Federation and Zepyrian officials working together, their interactions still somewhat awkward but genuinely cooperative. The crisis had forced them to see each other differently, to recognize that their strengths complemented rather than competed. The new equilibrium felt fragile but promising, a foundation built on shared experience rather than theoretical advantage. The genetic results arrived 3 months after the battle. The data came without ceremony, just a standard transmission from the joint science team. Reed scanned the report standing on the palace balcony, the armor humming softly against his skin. The findings explained everything that shouldn't have been possible. Reed carried Zepyrian genetic markers from millennia ago. The sequencing showed clear matches across 17 chromosomal regions. His human DNA contained sequences that only appeared in Zepyrian royalty. The markers were ancient, degraded by generations of separation, but unmistakable once the analysis was complete. Their species shared ancestry before starfaring separation. The divergence point predated recorded history for both civilizations. Some ancestral group had split, one branch developing on Earth, the other on Zepyria. The separation had been complete enough to create two distinct species, but the underlying connection remained. The prophecy's outsider meant outside royal circles, not species. The ancient texts had been mistranslated for generations. The word previously read as alien actually meant outside the chosen bloodline. The armor was designed to activate for anyone with the right genetic markers, regardless of their origin world. Royalty had simply been the most likely carriers. Varaya and Reed shared more than bond. They shared heritage. Their genetic similarity exceeded random chance. The markers aligned in patterns that suggested common ancestry within the last 10,000 generations. They were distant cousins separated by evolutionary paths, but family nonetheless. This explained why the ritual worked between human and Zepyrian. The energy exchange required biological compatibility that shouldn't exist between species. Their shared genetic markers created the necessary resonance. The armor recognized Reed as kin because, in the most fundamental sense, he was. Their connection transcended cultural difference to biological reality. The bond they'd formed wasn't just emotional or psychological. It operated on a cellular level, their bodies recognizing each other as kindred. The ritual had worked because their biology remembered what their minds had forgotten. Earth and Zepyria were never truly separate civilizations. The genetic evidence suggested contact before recorded history. Zepyrian ancestors had visited Earth or humans had visited Zepyria. The direction remained unclear. But the connection was undeniable, written in DNA that both species carried. The armor recognized what history had forgotten. Its systems had scanned Reed and found the markers it was designed to seek. The selection hadn't been random or miraculous. It had followed programming older than either of their civilizations. Activation parameters set by ancestors who understood that bloodlines could survive across stars. The discovery changed how both species viewed their relationship. The Federation's anthropological models required complete revision. Zepyrian historical records needed re-examination. They weren't just allies who had overcome differences. They were family reuniting after millennia apart. Reed looked at Varia standing beside him. Her profile against the violet sky seemed both alien and familiar. The genetic connection explained the instant rapport he'd felt, the ease of their communication, the success of the bonding ritual. They had been strangers who were never truly strangers. The armor hummed with satisfaction against his skin. It had completed its primary function, activating the Guardian with the right genetic markers regardless of origin. The system had worked exactly as designed, finding the needed bloodline where no one had thought to look. The ancient programmers had ensured their weapon would awaken when needed, even if their descendants forgot why it worked. They stood together on the balcony overlooking Zapiria's capital, the rebuilt city spreading below them like a field of crystalline flowers. Reed felt the armor's familiar hum against his skin, quieter now, settled into its new normal. Varia's hand rested on the railing near his, not touching but close enough to feel the energy between them. The violet sky deepened toward evening, the first stars appearing like pinpricks in twilight fabric. Balancing personal relationship with political responsibilities became their daily reality. Morning briefings mixed military assessments with trade agreements. Evening receptions included both Federation diplomats and Zapirian elders. They learned to shift between languages, between customs, between the formal distance required by protocol, and the closeness they actually shared. The armor helped with the transitions, its systems providing subtle cues about cultural expectations. Their bond strengthened through shared governance. Reed found himself thinking in terms of we rather than I when considering policy decisions. Varia consulted him on matters that had been solely her domain before. They developed a rhythm of leadership that combined human pragmatism with Zapirian tradition. Challenges that would have divided them earlier now became problems to solve together. Humor helped slice through the weight of their positions. Reed would catch Varia's eye during particularly tedious negotiations and see the same amusement reflected back. They developed private jokes about bureaucratic obstacles, about the endless paperwork that came with saving civilizations. The armor would sometimes pulse with shared amusement at particularly ridiculous moments, its systems recognizing the emotional exchange. They referenced cosmic ordination with deliberate lightness. When particularly unlikely coincidences worked in their favor, Reed would murmur about destiny having a sense of humor. Varia would counter-suggest that the universe simply appreciated efficiency. The genetic connection that scientists found became part of their private mythology. Cousins separated by stars, reunited by crisis. They treated the profound as commonplace, because treating it as miraculous would have been overwhelming. The ritual they performed had created lasting connection beyond the crisis. Reed could still feel the energy exchange when they stood close, the subtle transfer that sustained both him and the armor. Varia's presence provided a calm center that helped regulate the suit's power demands. What began as survival necessity had become their normal state, as natural as breathing. They faced challenges as partners rather than diplomat and princess. When Federation officials questioned Zapirian energy management practices, they responded with unified positions. When Zapir traditionalists resisted technological sharing, they presented joint solutions. Their dual perspective became their greatest asset, allowing them to bridge gaps that would have stalled negotiations between separate representatives. Earth continued its journey linked to Zapiria through them. The Federation's expansion now included Zapirian technology in its development plans. Cultural exchanges happened weekly, artists and scientists moving between worlds with increasing frequency. Reed's dual role meant he reported to both governments while answering to something larger than either. The armor's presence ensured he never forgot that larger responsibility. Their union represented the fusion of human and Zapirian destinies. The genetic connection scientists discovered provided scientific basis for what they already felt, that their species were never meant to be separate. The partnership felt less like choice and more like recognition of something that should have been true all along. They stood watching the stars brighten over the capital, two people who had become the living bridge between worlds. The armor hummed softly, its light pulsing in rhythm with their heartbeats. Below them, the city lights began to glow against the deepening violet sky. They had work to do tomorrow, problems to solve, challenges to face. But for this moment they simply stood together, watching the world they had saved continue its quiet revolution around them. The armor fragment in his chest pulsed with a warmth that never faded. Reed felt it constantly, a subtle vibration against his sternum that served as permanent reminder of his transformation. The glow intensified whenever Varia entered the room, reacting to her presence with instinctive recognition. The connection between them ran through crystal and flesh, binding them in ways neither could fully explain but both accepted as necessary. He balanced human needs against guardian responsibilities daily. Basic functions required conscious effort, eating enough calories to sustain the armor's energy drain, sleeping despite the suit's low-level activity, maintaining physical fitness to handle the armor's weight. The line between his body and the technology blurred further each week. Sometimes he forgot where he ended and the armor began. The suit's hunger remained, though diminished after bonding with Varaya. It still drew energy from him, but now the drain felt measured, controlled. The constant energy exchange between them became part of their routine, as natural as breathing. Each morning began with quiet minutes together, hands touching, energy flowing between them to stabilize the system. The ritual had started as survival necessity and become their foundation. He represented Zapiria to the Federation while remaining fundamentally human. Diplomatic functions required careful negotiation of his dual nature. Federation officials still eyed the armor with suspicion, their scanners unable to penetrate its surface. Zapirians treated him with reverence that felt uncomfortable. He navigated between these expectations, never fully belonging to either world but serving both. The armor's knowledge surfaced at unexpected moments. During negotiations, battle strategies from forgotten wars would flash through his mind, offering tactical insights. While reviewing trade agreements, cultural context from centuries past would clarify Zapirian positions. The suit's memory operated like an additional sense, providing information he hadn't known he needed until the moment required it. He protected both worlds without complete allegiance to either. His decisions considered Federation security and Zapirian tradition equally. When conflicts arose between their interests, he sought solutions that served both civilizations. The armor seemed to guide him toward balance, its systems favoring cooperation over domination. The Guardian served something larger than political boundaries. The prophecy fulfilled became daily reality with new challenges. Saving civilizations was one thing. Governing them together was another. Each day brought fresh problems that ancient texts hadn't anticipated. Trade disputes, cultural misunderstandings, technical compatibility issues, all required solutions that respected both species' needs. The armor helped bridge gaps, but the work remained constant. True guardianship meant integrating power with living bond. Reed learned that strength came not from the armor itself, but from the connections that sustained it. His relationship with Varaya provided stability that allowed him to wield the suit's power without being consumed by it. Their partnership became the anchor that kept him grounded amid increasing responsibilities. The psychological burden grew with each decision. Protecting Zapiria from external threats was straightforward, compared to navigating internal politics. The armor amplified his emotions, making self-control essential. Fear, anger, desire, all carried consequences when amplified by the suit's systems. He learned to monitor his own reactions as carefully as he monitored threat assessments. The fragment in his chest glowed brighter during moments of connection. When he and Varya found consensus on difficult issues, when they developed solutions that served both peoples, the crystal pulsed with approval. The armor recognized successful integration of its power with their partnership. The physical response confirmed they were following the right path. Daily life became a series of small sacrifices. Personal time diminished to near nothing. Private moments became rare treasures between endless meetings and security briefings. The armor required constant attention, its systems needing regular calibration against Zapiria's energy fields. What had been temporary crisis management became permanent reality. The weight never lessened, but he grew stronger beneath it. The armor's presence, once alien and uncomfortable, now felt like part of his own body. The responsibilities that had overwhelmed him initially became patterns he could manage. He learned to wield power without being defined by it, to protect without controlling, to serve without losing himself. The living bond with Varya made everything possible. Her energy sustained him. Her understanding guided him. Her partnership strengthened him. They faced each challenge together, their connection allowing them to handle burdens that would have crushed either alone. The true power of the Guardian emerged not from the armor, but from what they built between them. The armor never wanted a warrior. It chose a diplomat instead. Reed understood true strength lies in connection, not domination. His willingness to embrace the unknown proved more valuable than any combat skill. Sometimes the greatest power appears in unexpected forms. Survival depends on accepting what we cannot immediately understand. The Guardian role demanded openness, not just strength. Honoring bonds across species and traditions became the real victory. The armor's selection proved that empathy can be the ultimate strategic advantage when facing existential threats. Guardians protect what connects us, Nen.